Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pine Lily chapter meeting for May. So Karina could not be here today, so I'm very sorry. You have to listen to me do the announcements and introductions while we wait for Zach to get done with something he is doing very quickly. So I'm Valerie Anderson. I am the Policy and Legislation Chair. Hopefully you guys are going to vote me in again for Policy and Legislation Chair for the Pine Lily chapter. That's a reminder to please, if you are a Pine Lily member, please check your email and vote. Elections close tonight, and it includes some bylaw changes, which we worked really hard on. Taylor worked really hard on, Karina, and so please go check your email and vote, because we need a quorum to approve bylaw changes. So this is critical for you to go in there and go to your email, and it'll take you 5 minutes. Please just vote. The next thing I needed to announce was, native plant pickup is happening on June 5th. This is another Pine Lily chapter member benefit. So you can, let's see if I can share the screen. So here is the email. So just so you know to look for it in your account, in your email account. We're accepting pre-orders from today through June 3rd at midnight. The pickup is at Brownie Wise Park at Tupperware Island Conservation Area, 1150 Altman Road in Kissimmee. That's off of Neptune. And the pickup is Saturday, June 5th from 3 to 4 p.m. It's a PayPal link to pay us, so make sure you pay. And there is the plant order form attached to the email. So download that, fill it out, send it back to Taylor, and Taylor will pick up your plants for you, and you can pick them up in Kissimmee. So she goes to Green Isle and then picks up your plants. The next thing I wanted to announce is this upcoming Saturday, we have a field trip at Disney Wilderness Preserve, and your pre-sign up is required. So please check your email again and register. This is going to be really cool. DWP hasn't been open for COVID, and they just reopened. And so this is going to be a pretty awesome tour. So I recommend that you register and attend. Attend. We also recently, in very exciting chapter activities, you may recall that we rescued some Sequoia lanceolata, which are state-threatened ground orchids. We rescued these from near the airport in Kissimmee, and we had been holding these plants for quite a while. This has been a couple of years that we've had these plants, and we finally were able to coordinate a relocation restoration activity at Lake Lizzie Conservation Area, and we won't tell you where those are because we don't want them being poached, but I wanted to show some slides from that. The photographer is Sarah Clatworthy-Lee. So on the left is Taylor, and that's Acacia, who you can vote for, potentially. And those are the seed pods of the orchid. And those are the roots. So we couldn't introduce any invasive species, and our rescue property was filled with invasives. So Taylor rinsed off all the plant roots. And then here's a stem that's planted. And these like sort of moderately wet habitats. Oh, here's the planting group. Yeah, so there's Jennifer Adams, Sandy, Saoirse, Sarah, David. And then here's one with a flowering stalk, seed head being planted. Okay, and it looks like Zach is back. Hi, Zach.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. You peeked out there a little bit, so I dropped you down.
Oh, right, excellent.
All right, so Zach, do you want me to introduce you?
Sure, if you like.
Okay, so I've known Zach for a while. He's really awesome, and he's been the Florida Fire Manager for the Nature Conservancy and helps me with getting my prescribed burn certification. And he's going to talk to us today about biodiversity through Pyrodiversity. So take it away, Zach.
Thanks. Thanks, Val. Much appreciated. And I just, through the craziness of computers and everything going on, we've just got this rigged up. So Val, I can't see anything in any kind of chat box. So if people have questions, I don't know, how do you want to handle that? You can field them as we go, or do you want to wait till the end? What's your thoughts?
That's up to you. Pine Lily, these meetings, we don't get a ton of questions, so I think you could go either way.
If you got something, so Val, I'll leave it to your discretion. If there's something really burning that someone asks, then feel free to interrupt me. So thank you. So hey now, I'm here all night. So thanks, Val. Yeah, I've been working for the Nature Conservancy for 16 years. I have a new job next week in tall timbers, and I've been doing fire for 34 years. And I started out studying ants at University of Central Florida, and I thought I was going to be the next E.O. Wilson. But my first job at the Florida Park Service in Wekiwa, my boss asked me if I wanted to get on a fire, and yeah, of course. And so that's been my sort of career since then. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about, just in general, a bit of wildfire information. Any one of the topics that I'm going to cover could easily take up hours or semesters. Fire ecology, the social aspects of fire, fire history, fire weather, control burning, firefighting, human fire mythologies, the money behind firefighting. There's just so much. But what I'll sort of focus on is Florida and how our state is incredibly diverse, and it should be called the fire state, really, instead of the sunshine state. So let's get moving. So briefly, wildfire information. In 2020, there was almost 60,000 wildfires compared with 50,000 in 2019. 10 million acres were burned last year compared with 4.7 in 2019. And over the past 10 years, there's an average of 62,000 wildfires, an average of 7 million acres. And this subject alone is incredibly complex. It's very, very complicated because you see on the upper right picture, that's actually the smoke column from a large fire actually punching through the atmosphere. There's so much heat generated. Middle picture is, of course, homes destroyed. Bottom picture is people driving through, massive fires in their neighborhoods. And it's a difficult subject to broach because there's so much of the ecosystems, like California, for example, it's really flammable. A writer named Stephen Pine, who I'll talk about in a few minutes, he's written that about almost 60% of California habitats are fire dependent. Most are fire adapted. Only like the Mojave deserts, the wetlands are spared, but it is also a state that has been exposed to lots of fire and lots of people live in it, like here in Florida. So between people moving into areas that burn, between the invasions of invasive grasses like cheatgrass, common Mediterranean grass, they burn really hot. There's lots of factors involved that create a landscape that does burn. However, people do live in these areas, and in dry times, fires start. And I don't know if you remember, it was last year, maybe the year before, a wildfire was actually started by a gender reveal party. So yet another reason why those are not a great idea. But for the most part, over 90% of the fires in California are started either on accident or on purpose. One was a golf club hitting a rock, which caused a spark, and then that caused a fire. So there are more wildfire acres every year. The causes are complex, and some of it's got to do with climate change. Some of it has to do with how we live in an area. And other parts of it are fire suppression policies that were put in place, especially after 1910. So, but in a nutshell, we have had lots of wildfires the past decade, and the sizes are getting larger. A big part of this is this, and you've heard this term, wildland-urban interface, wildland-urban intermix. Basically, we like to live in the woods. It's beautiful. I love to live near places that have plants and animals. It's a beautiful thing. And a lot of those plants and animals have evolved or have been exposed to fire, so they burn. And it is, in the past 30 to 40 years, the number one, like the highest percentage of where homes have been constructed is in these two areas. On the left, lower left picture, that's wildland-urban intermix. Homes are scattered basically inside the woods. wildland-urban interface on the lower right picture, where homes are right up against the woods. So a mix of those are scattered throughout the country. And you can see the orange on the United States is a code for the intermix, so a huge growth of people living within stuff that burns, and yellow is interface. So this is just a reality check for all of us, that we are living in places that historically have burned and will burn. But is it just us? No, there's lots of wildfires around the world, and if anything that is a fuel can burn. So if the climate is tweaked a little bit, whether it's hotter, drier, less rain, more rain, it results in more fuels burning. And so you'll see lots of places in the Arctic that are burning because there's been a recession of some of the ice, some of the peat's exposed, more of that burns, but also Africa, South America, Australia, Asia, Europe, Russia, China. No place is spared from some sort of fire activity around the world. And some of this, of course, is linked to clear cutting in some of the rainforest areas, exposing places that didn't burn. But generally, it isn't. So it isn't just us. So this is a global phenomenon. So if anyone here is interested in reading about fire and wants to get into way more detail than I could ever talk about, this fellow, Stephen Pine, is a fantastic writer. So, you know, if any of you need recommendations of books to read, definitely go to that website there and go on eBay or wherever and pick up some of his books. He has written he's written about fire pretty much everywhere around the world. And he's really good at linking people to fire. And one of his main thoughts are that we're not separate from fire. And he calls our current state now called the Pyrocene. And he says the maturing Pyrocene is not a pretty sight. We need to relearn how to coexist with it because it isn't going away. He also views prescribed fire as a part of living with fire because, in his words, almost to put this with COVID terms, if you think of fire as a contagion, which in many ways it is, the prescribed burning is part of a herd immunity, for all of us on the planet. And he's a big believer in a multi-pronged approach to getting healthier habitats, more diverse habitats, more safe places where people live, better evacuation plans. So there's lots of things we can do. But at the end of the day, he's thinking that where we are now, everywhere around the world is affected by fire in some way. And so it's an irony because we, as a species, us people, we've always lived with and depended upon fire. It's been a part of our culture, religion, and even creation myths. There isn't really a religion or a history that doesn't have something related to fire, whether it's a thunderbird or a burning bush, or there's so many fables and tales, Greek mythology and Prometheus. There's fantastic Australian and African tribal tales of fire, Native American tribes, etc. Basically, everywhere around the world, fire has been a part of our culture. And so that picture I showed you a few slides ago showing wildfires around the world, that kind of mimics and echoes what the path of our own history was, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago or more, when we were basically, living on the land, learning to actually take fire as a tool, whether it's for hunting or cooking or even drawing in caves. Fire has been a part of us. And so we find ourselves today struggling with this, fighting fire and having this antagonistic view of it, where in reality, we've always lived with it and it has benefited us as it benefits the habitats around them. So let's now hit Florida. So Florida, like I said before, we call it a sunshine state, but with our climate, our geography, how we kind of stick out there in the middle of the Atlantic and the Gulf, and our culture, combine those, because we're a relatively young state historically or geologically, but all of this combined has created a place where it has been exposed to frequent fire. So first off, lightning. I have relatives in Kentucky and they always say, I don't want to come to Florida because an alligator will kill me. And I go, no, an alligator is not going to kill you. People driving on I-4 will. But the other thing that we have a lot of is lightning. And I think I read an article in the paper, was it last week, where Florida has now been passed as far as the #1 state with the most lightning strikes per square mile but we're so close. It kind of goes back and forth. Historically, our region here has been exposed to the most lightning strikes per square mile than anywhere else in the United States. And so if you have lots of lightning, you have lots of fires. And if you've had that historically, again, plants and animals will learn to love it, depend on it, and adapt to it. And again, think of that map I just showed you with wildfires. This actually is a map of lightning strikes. So very similar to that wildfire map is this lightning strike map. So northern tip of Australia, Africa, South America, and there we are, the United States, where the darker, the redder the color, the more lightning strikes. So you'll see California there on the edge, not a lot of lightning strikes. And so you wonder, well, that's really wild. There's not all the wildfires out there. So leaning toward a lot of human-caused fires, a longer interval between fires for some of those natural habitats compared to Florida, where sandhill and flatwoods need a lot of fire. But yes, similar. So if you look at all these other countries, lots of lightning, so lots of fire. Zooming in closer, you'll see the hot spots of Florida, where we are in Central Florida. So Osceola County, Orange County, Seminole Lake, all these counties along the I-4 corridor have had and do have a lot of lightning. It's certainly something we are very cautious of when we're outside doing control burning in the summer months. We keep our eyes up to the sky for any kind of lightning and thunderheads. So if you have lots of lightning and lightning is hitting the landscape, this is what you would see as quote unquote natural fires, where lightning would hit a tree, spiral down to the ground, ignite some grasses. The grasses would then continue that fire. And before people and roads, well, before roads anyway, the fire would just keep going. And fire ecologists and fire historians who have looked at some charcoal core samples of lakes in Florida, tree rings, because we do have what's called dendrochronology in Florida, looking at tree rings for evidence of past events. And there is evidence of large-scale, widespread fires that probably occurred after perhaps major hurricanes, where there was a lot of fuel on the ground, and then there was a dry time. Like right now, it's pretty dry. And there are fires. There's one in Brevard County that I think jumped 95. So the fire paleoecologist would tell you that there was a lot of fire that occurred in large-scale swaths, just when the timing's right, dry, a lot of fuel, lightning, fire would just spread forever. And this is what it would look like. This is sort of now between you and I, this is actually a picture from a helicopter. We are actually dropping these little ignition, these spheres that look like ping pong balls. It's a way for us to do a lot of fire over a large landscape in a very mild way. So this allows all these fires to join and cover a pretty large area. So, but this is, because it's interesting. It's hard to actually get a picture of a lightning caused fire, but this is what it would have looked like. So if you have millions of years of lightning, now let's throw in people. We love fire. If any one of us were to walk outside and there was a campfire, you'd be drawn to it. And so the Native Americans in Florida, like in the upper left, and the cracker cowboy culture in the lower right, they utilize fire as tools in very similar ways. Native Americans would use fire to drive game, to clear areas, to actually add nutrients to the soil. And same with the folks raising cattle in Florida. Apply fire to the palmetto grasslands, providing green growth for the cattle in the wintertime. And as a result, the beautiful pictures that upper right, and thank you, Val, for mentioning Disney Wilderness Preserve, because that's where that picture is taken in the upper right. Awesome longleaf flatwoods. It's just a beautiful prairie with pine trees. And the lower left is basically a natural flatwoods fire. So people were using fire for 5,000 years, 10,000 years. And so combined with all of that, you've got a state that has been exposed to lots of fire. So now in our history, the culture part, so you see culture where people use fire. Now we're going to get into the culture of people that don't like fire. So back from 1928 to 31, there was a group called the Dixie Crusaders. You see these nice young men there in their coats looking very, smart, and you would of course trust them. But look at what the letters on the back, right there on the side of that van: stop woods fires, better use of wood. It's all about basically fire is bad. And these people went in the Southeast and they actually showed movies to about 3 million people, one called Burnin' Bill in the lower right, which I've yet to get a copy of. It may be gone forever. But these folks basically traveled barnstorming around the Southeast, from school to school to school, from a farm, anywhere that they could set up a projector, which was mounted on the truck, and then put up a screen. So people who hadn't even seen a movie before would see this. And they were all anti-fire movies. Pretty effective marketing campaign against fire. And so we don't really know, how much impact that had in the sort of mindset of people on fire, but they were, they reached so many people. There was even an act, like I mentioned here, the Clark-McNary Act of 1924, that prohibited federal funding to any state that tolerated controlled burning. So at this point, there was a large anti-fire sentiment going on. A lot of it was tied to the big fire in 1910, which started federal policies and practices, which really put an emphasis on putting all ignitions out as quick as you could on a very military type scale. And then, of course, that led to Smokey Bear and another incredibly powerful, emotional public campaign. And you can see these signs. It's very, it's emotional, and there's a cross there. And, the shameful waste weakens America. And of course, Bambi. What's interesting, when I give this presentation in front of large crowds and I ask them to raise their hands, and I ask them, do you remember the fire that killed Bambi's mother? And they all raise their hands, but Bambi's mother wasn't killed by fire, but by the hunter. But the fire in the movie made such a great impact. As a fan of cartoons and animation, I absolutely love that movie. It's beautiful, but same thing. So there's this sort of swinging back toward pushing what's bad about fire. And that lingered for a while, and it had an impact on fire throughout the United States and the world, which of course then had a negative impact on diversity. When we were losing indigo snakes in different parts of Florida, some of it was tied to the hunting of the gopher tortoises, because that's where they lived. But other components were lack of fire, which then reduced the number of gopher tortoises, which then reduced the number of snakes. So there was this negative impact on diversity, because fire in of itself, which created the diversity, had a very negative public image. This magazine, Harper's Magazine, there was an article written by a psychologist that was hired by the U.S. Forest Service to basically brand a lot of the Southerners as really crazy folks. And again, as a lover of art and cartoons and comics, this speaks right there. This informs you without knowing anything else. That's not a good person right there. And yet, another part of that campaign to persuade folks using fire in Florida that it was bad. Well, it reached a lot of people, but I will tell you, it did not reach everybody. And so one of the great pushbacks against a lot of that campaign were the landowners in Florida, the private landowners who were the ranchers, who raised cattle, who had large landscapes. And you can debate and you can argue about the utility, the value of pastures and ranches and cattle operations. And certainly the folks at Archibald Biological Station on MacArthur Ranch are doing a really cool diversity study to see how much diversity is present in differently grazed pastures. But those folks kept the tool of fire alive, and it never stopped in Florida. One of my thoughts about how we're a little different than California is that in most places in California, the private landowners stopped using fire, and the tool of fire was sort of removed for a while. But in Florida, it never stopped. The folks who used it kept using. And then you got to the Tall Timbers Fire Ecology Conferences, which started in 1962, and another wealth of information you can read about. Great names that were looking at, well, wait a minute, we know that more fire equals more game birds, which is the quail is what was focused on, more turkey. So a lot of what was pushed from an ecological standpoint was driven by the game animals, which it's funny, as an ant person myself, most knowledge of ants is about the fire ant. Why? Because, well, there's a lot of money trying to study it. And so the benefit of these conferences was this now was sort of the kernel of, well, we really should be burning this land, and it sort of spread in the 1970s to the Florida Park Service. I don't know if anyone here remembers a fellow named Jim Stevenson, who was an amazing advocate for fire at the time when it wasn't as popular. And so the Florida Park Service, where I started working, was one of the agencies who took it seriously. And so as a result, a lot of their state parks are beautiful and well fire maintained. But this we can point to this conference as one of the key moments to sort of swing it back. So Florida, there are, gosh, I don't know, 70-ish different ecosystems. You can argue how many there are, but in general, most need some sort of fire to maintain their structure, diversity, ground cover, animal, plant components. And if you remove fire, or you put too much fire, too much water, too little fire, the plant community will shift and begin to change into something else. It's a really interesting thing if you were to look at Florida from above as a mosaic of all these different landscapes and plantscapes and animalscapes and water. And by removing and moving fire back and forth, which has happened historically, probably there were shifts in the amount of scrub or longleaf or sandhill. But in general, we know the plant habit, the communities on your screen, we have a decent feel for what keeps them as they are. And the upper left is basically coastal scrub, coastal strand, lots of different names, but over that horizon is the Atlantic Ocean. And that's a fire when I was working in Brevard County that I was able to light near the Archie Carr Wildlife Refuge, and a beautiful fire. It's great to have the Atlantic Ocean as a fire break, but incredibly rare mice in there and plants, and it burns like crazy. Of course, pitcher plants depend upon fire. That picture was taken, I believe, in Highlands Hammock State Park in an area that hadn't had pitcher plants for 2 decades. And yet we ran a fire through it. Took us a couple fires because we tried to be pretty gentle about it. And these plants just basically exploded out of the ground. So the bulbs must have been there for many decades. Upper right, pine rocklands in the Keys and southern part of Florida, a very rare habitat. Basically, you take a longleaf pine with rare herbs and you plop it down on old coral. And so that habitat, it requires fire to basically fertilize itself because it's growing on rock. The lower right, the Everglades, river of grass, but also river of fire. The middle lower picture, sandhill or high pine, one of my favorite habitats. And when I worked at Wekiwa Springs State Park, I started out there, 34 years ago, I don't remember now. But the main park drive was not as open as it is now. You couldn't see the campground, you couldn't see anything. And so the biologists there decided we're gonna cut some live oaks down. And that was a little controversial with some of the folks who visited the park. They like their live oaks. But the biologists explained, we're gonna focus on this area and restore it to this rare habitat. And then fast forward 20 years after that, you've got fox squirrels, you've got an amazing array of endemic plants and animals endemic to this habitat. And why? Because of fire. And then lower left, sandpine scrub, one of the most difficult habitats to manage if you are a fire manager or a park or preserve manager. You just shake your head if that's the first day on your job and you go, here you go, because it's probably the habitat most similar to Western fire fire habitats. That is what they call a catastrophic fire regime. Burns like crazy. And then what comes up is more sand pines. But there are unique plants and animals and bryophyte layers within that as well. So all of these, a little pyro tour of Florida, they look like they look to you right now because of the certain amount of fire and water applied to them. So as land managers, we do have to make that choice and that call. What do we want? What do we want to preserve and save for the next generation of Floridians that come here and they see what was here naturally? And we have to make the call and how often we burn things. So this is a really cool flower called Bartrams Ixia that popped up on a St. Johns River Water Management District site. And big shout out to our water management districts who do an amazing job with fire, because they understand that the better maintained an area is with fire, the better it is for water recharge, besides all of the beautiful flowers. So this is a picture that was taken 6 months post-fire. And you can see by the char on the trees, it was a pretty hot fire, and the black stump there in front of you. So everything in that picture was down to the ground black. And yet this Ixia just came up out of the ground as well, stimulated by the fire, fertilized by what the chemical process of fire did. And now you've got a rare flower that's, a whole prairie of this rare flower because of fire. And it also points to how resilient and how quick growing a lot of our plants are in fire maintained places. You don't see this in places out west where the years between fires might be 20 or 30, but here it's not uncommon to have 2 years between fire, 1 year, 2, 3. And so our plants respond very well. And if the plants respond very well, sure enough, our animals depend upon the structure of the habitat that fire creates and provides, and the food that fire provides. Florida scrub jay in the upper left should be our state bird, incredibly tied to the structure of the scrub habitat. The folks at Archibald Biological Station have done tons of research, Wolfenden and Fitzpatrick, on what the scrub jay needs. And their studies were very definitive that tied reproductive success to fire. The flatwood salamander on the upper right, it actually needs its wet, boggy areas to be burned regularly in order to provide breeding habitats. Grasshopper sparrow, mints, of course, the gopher tortoise on the lower right. And then in the middle is a very, very rare rabbit, and it's a subspecies. It's called Civilygus palustris hefneri. And yes, that's the subspecies. Hugh Hefner and the Playboy Foundation actually sponsored research on this rabbit, this subspecies. It's only found on a couple of places, one, an Air Force base in the Lower Keys, where I was lucky enough to actually do a fire down there and saw this rabbit. And so you can say now, Val, you actually invited someone to present who showed you a Playboy bunny right there in the middle. But another example of, and you see, if you're familiar with the Keys, with the key deer and the rare plants down there, how, very rare those animals and plants are due to the island, biogeographical part of it, but fire as well. The key deer, which I don't have a picture of here, they also depend upon well-burned pine rockland habitat. And then real quick, people do ask me, do animals die in fire? Every public presentation I've done, people ask me, and I say, yes, some do. Of course, no one asks me, how many spiders were killed, but it's some animals do die in fires. This is a cool picture of a gopher tortoise, 2 separate pictures on 2 separate fires. And if a fire is coming through, they will find their burrows. They're very good at it. But if they can't, they will do this corkscrew behavior where they'll actually dig themselves down into the sand. Because if a fire is coming through, especially in a grassy habitat like sandhill, the heat goes up, not much heat downwards. And so they burrow and dig right down into the ground. And the picture on the lower left is really cool. And you can see it's all charred all around it. And that's just, I stumbled upon that. And there was this gopher tortoise sitting there. I was like, oh my gosh. So it's a pretty cool behavior. And again, that behavior is born through, evolution, evolutionary pressure. The animals that did that survived, and sure enough, a great adaptation to living in an area that burns a lot. Just dig down. So if we have made the case that Florida is a pyrodiverse state, the habitats depend upon certain cycles and frequencies of fire. The plants and animals that are found here and unique are dependent upon fire. People have cultivated fire for thousands of years. Lightning has caused fire for millions of years. Then what makes Florida unique is fire. So this picture is an overall map of the about 9 million acres of public land in Florida. So the green is state land, a lot of state parks. The brown is federal land. The U.S. Like Apalachicola National Forest up there in the Panhandle, the Everglades in the south, and the military, Avon Park Air Force Range, Eglin, and the far west actually have some of the best habitats in Florida because there's a lot of fire on military ranges. But between this, in counties, a lot of great county programs and nonprofits like Alachua Conservation Trust, Nature Conservancy, North Florida Land Trust. There's a lot of people that have land. And if it is unique because of fire, and now the public owns it, we own this land, it needs to be burned. So that's why we used prescribed fire. A safe way to apply a natural process to ensure ecosystem health, which is all about diversity, and a method to reduce wildfire risk. Doesn't eliminate wildfires, but it reduces the risk. And so it's implemented by professionals for many reasons. It's implemented by ranchers, by private landowners, might include mechanical treatments of vegetation. Sometimes you do have to go in and cut trees down just because you want to reduce the chance of fire escaping. And it is in the Florida statutes. You are, as a landowner, it's your right to burn. And if you take a class and become a certified prescribed burn manager, then you are held very, very safe from lawsuits. It's what's called a gross negligence level. That's the level you're protected to. So Florida has amazing legal protection for landowners who want to burn, which is why we burn anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 million acres a year in controlled burning. From, that's agriculture, biologists burning, lots of reasons, whatever the reason. There's a lot of fire going on. And our statutes just recently were copied by the state of California. We've been working with them. Some of our fire councils and the California fire councils have been working together to try to promote that, to get more fire on the ground in California, which is really cool. So we do this. It is a practice, it's an art, it's a profession. But is it easy? So no, it's a challenge. A lot of it is because of development and smoke. And the population is still increasing. 21 million people live here. And when conservation acquisitions are made, if you buy land, if the state buys land, or if someone donates land to a land trust, they're often fragmented. And that is one of the difficulties and challenges with conservation lands. If it is bought fragmented, if it is in danger of being fragmented, Val, I don't have to tell you that story from your amazing work with Split Oak. Competing priorities within conservation agencies. When I was working for the Park Service, I wore about 6 hats, and I was not a full-time fire person, and actually very few people are in any of our conservation agencies. And that's an issue because good fire is dictated by the good weather, not by my Zoom meeting schedule. So you've got to be flexible to go get burning done. You got to wake up every morning and go, what can I burn today? And that's a challenge. And this ties into the next thing, lack of funding for professional fire staff. As we acquire land, and I think I've heard rumors that there will be a huge slug of money coming up to buy more land in Florida. It could be $400 million. Same thing, the staffing of our agencies. The Florida Forest Service and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are the two largest state, the two agencies that own and manage the most land. Florida Park Service comes in third with state land, and their staffing hasn't increased much, and that's a problem. And then rapid change in land ownership use, those very same ranchers that I was telling you about earlier that really have saved fire in Florida. Now they're up to the 4th or 5th or 6th generation. And if you're, 20, 25 years old and your grandparents, say the 60 to 100,000 acres is going to be yours, you're going to bust your butt and maybe get 60 grand a year running cows. A developer says, I'll give you 20 million or more for it. And that's a challenge. And so another reason why we work a lot within the Conservancy with the ag community, trying to hold on as best we can. But we have to meet these challenges. I mean, we have to burn, and we do. We meet them. The amount of controlled burning, like I said, it has gone up every year, or there's a slow, steady increase. It may fluctuate based on drier years, but everything between fire councils, mentoring, working together, because ultimately the fire doesn't care what patch you wear. It just doesn't. Fire is a landscape it's a landscape effect. And as long as we all work together, because we have to, we will meet these challenges, and we do. There's also a chance that more fire on frequent fire habitats could also be a carbon sequestration method, because like that picture I showed you, that Bartrams Ixia, what was all that besides pretty flowers and green stems? That's carbon. Those plants were created by another process taking carbon out of the air. So if we have lots of fire, because it's difficult to get funding for fire, then maybe that's a way for a carbon sequestration system. More fire, more diversity, more sequestration, more funding. At least that's kind of what I'm hoping. So a couple really cool pictures. Like I mentioned before, we work with so many people. The lower, this is a great, all these three pictures are our Central Florida fire staff. If anyone on this call is lucky enough to know Steve Morrison in the upper left, Sticky Steve, one of the best burners I've ever met in my life, and a born mentor and teacher. These are pictures of college students who came from University of Idaho, where they have a really good fire program, but they don't have a lot of places to practice to burn. So they, on their spring break, paid for their trip down. We put them up for free, and they worked with our Central Florida fire crew hand in hand, and they got great experience. And so that's how I learned. I was mentored by amazing people, Rosie Mulholland and Walt Thompson. And so we're trying to do the same, paying it forward. So we do a lot of this, because fire is an art, it's a science, and it's a skill, a people skill too. A good burner is part chess player, part naturalist, part public relations master, part sheepdog, trying to keep the fire where you want it to be. You have to be thinking many hours ahead. And it's one of the most amazing things you can do. We have the Florida Forest Service, that picture on the left there, looking at a helicopter, actually one of the best state forestry agencies around. We also, on the lower right, you can tell we work with folks who light fire from horses. That right there is a picture from a couple of years ago, the St. Johns River Water Management District lighting fire off a horse. And the upper right is an all-female fire that occurred on the Disney Wilderness Preserve 2 years ago, and so part of this also is one of my goals in teaching and training is to broaden the diversity of fire practitioners, because like I say, if fire doesn't recognize patches, it sure as heck doesn't recognize gender. It doesn't recognize religion, politics. It is fire. And if you are comfortable in these elements, you can be part of an amazing team and do stuff that benefits people and wildlife. And then just a really cool picture of a longleaf flatwoods burning. This is how it naturally burns. The palmettos, the saw palmettos, they're so cool because those little buds they're still green. And that fire behind them, that's what it was as it rolled through there. But it went so quick. Palmetto burned on its fronds, the buds are fine. In about a week or 2 weeks, you'll probably see flower stalks come out. On the other end of that is sort of like a very low creeping leaf fire. This was an Ordway Swisher Biological Station, where we do a lot of training up there because that's what the flames are like. Low, but hot enough to give new students an idea of what fire feels like, which sounds kind of silly, but if you have never done this and you have to wear all that the protective gear, you do need to feel what fire feels like. And then this is a picture of a sandpine scrub on fire, and you can see the people on the left standing there calmly. This was a natural sandpine scrub fire that we had spent many years preparing for. So you can see the lower part of the picture, it was mowed. Downwind of this, we had already burned the pine flatwoods, and this was basically an ecological goal of letting a natural sandpine scrub fire go. So it was very windy, it was very dry and very hot, and it was a group effort between lots of different organizations to basically now practice some ecology, which is, again, very, very cool. And then from the wildfire perspective, fire, I don't know exactly where the wildfire was that I heard about last week in Brevard, but when I used to work in Brevard County for their environmentally endangered lands program, I burned a lot of the land over there. And so in the middle of your picture is a place called Jordan Scrub Sanctuary. And you can see the date, 1107. So I burned that in November of 2007. In May of 2008, there was what's called the Mother's Day or Osage fire that happened in Brevard County. Started so basically you're looking east, that's the Indian River there. And the fire started under this picture, sort of off of 95, coming toward this. And you can see the picture, or the lower part of that picture is black. That's the wildfire. And you can see what looks like lines through that lower part on a diagonal. That is a tractor plow that the Florida Forest Service uses to help or to try to stop a fire by cutting off the fuel that the fire is burning. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 passes, and it didn't matter. The fire just kept going. Keep in mind that tractor did that before the fire was there, so no worries. They're incredibly brave people that drive those tractors. So those lines were put in. Here comes the fire. It basically just laughed at it and kept going. But it hit that fire I did just the year previous, and look what happened. It spotted into the sanctuary and then went out, and then went around on the very right side, and it kept going until it actually went out on the Indian River. But the middle, where I had burned it the year before, basically stopped it inside there. So we don't have a lot of great examples like this, and that's kind of our fault. But we know that fire is a promoter of diversity. We know that. But it also can be a way to shift, to move, to nudge fires when they happen, when uncontrolled fires happen around. And then the last picture I show you is back when I was working in Brevard County. I did this 15-acre fire in a place called Dicerandra Scrub Sanctuary, home of the Dicerandra mint, Funiculata, and scrub jays, very, very rare, and surrounded by homes, surrounded by State Road 50 was on one side, power lines, the worst place you could ever think to do a fire, and I was in charge. And it took 3 years to plan, and I was so hoping that the weather was right. And sure enough, we were able to conduct this very first fire. And then since I've left there, I've heard that the homeowners they've had another fire there. And now they ask, hey, when's the next one? We're seeing some plants grow. And so I just leave you with this because it shows that you can do a fire in difficult places if everyone is involved and on board, and it's possible. So that, Val, is all I have. Oh, yeah. And then people do ask me, are there any books on Florida fire? And actually, no. Stephen Pine has a collection of essays in that middle one, Florida Fire Survey. Reed Noss, from when he worked at UCF, he does a fire ecology. Ecosystems of Florida, everyone knows that. That has still good information. The longleaf one on the left, and then the Forgotten Grasslands, too, that Reed wrote. So there's not a lot. And I've been pushing to do more. There's got to be more on like the fire history of Florida, which is really cool. So Val, if there's any questions, and so thank you. That's all I got.
Well, people, they're just going to need to ask questions in the chat for us to have questions.
And let's see.
Yeah, I second that. There's some other books. Mirage is good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I could go grab it. My mic cord.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm looking in the chat box. All right. Nothing there.
Nothing there. Yeah. Okay.
So either that means this was fantastic and I answered everyone's burning questions, or Val, it's just you and me. Well, or you and I.
You and I. It's just you and I, Zach.
That's right.
No, I mean, we did not get a lot of peak concurrent viewers. So I can imagine that is contributing to the dearth of comments. Oh, we got one.
Uh-oh.
Do people burn around Lake Okeechobee?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. Yes and no. And so the people that do the most burning around Lake Okeechobee is the sugar industry, which is its own interesting little ecosystem of issues down there, because the sugar industry does a lot of burning, basically cut and slash to help fertilize their fields for the next year's growth. So there's a lot of burning that goes on, a lot of public health concerns. That's also a political issue too with the current ag commissioner. But south and west towards the Everglades is where you get a lot of good natural burning. The Everglades National Park they have an amazing fire program. The Seminole tribe, actually, south of Lake Okeechobee, does a lot of cultural burning. I didn't talk about them, and that's my oversight. They still maintain a lot of their cultural fire practices down there, which is really great. But the north part, no. North part is just a big berm and development.
Right. Well, I mean, Okeechobee, the city of Okeechobee is north of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. If we talk about people, if it was natural again, if Lake Okeechobee did not have a big berm, if it was what it once was, which was a giant hurricane catch. I mean, that's what it did. When storms came through, it expanded by twice its size and then retracted again. That's what it does, filtering to the Everglades. If it were like it once was, then yes, it would have burned naturally. But as it is now, it's a big old water storage place.
And have seen them when it gets low. They have burned the lake.
Yeah. And and that's, yes. So, and I've seen that too with like cattails and stuff. And because that is when you start screwing with the lake's natural processes, you cause so many other problems. And so fire is utilized to reduce organics. So that's yep.
Yes. Jen says, I was thinking more the marsh areas right around Lake O.
Yeah. Yes. Some, but not what it could have been. Like if you've been to Wekiwa Springs State Park, there's a lake called Lake Pravat, which I remember we used to burn when it was low and basically just organics exposed. We'd burn it down to sand, and it was great because the Florida lakes, for the most part, require fire to do that, to basically reduce all that. And now you're back down to sand again. Then the water comes up and provides habitat for all kinds of herps and stuff. Yep. Good question.
Yeah, great question. I wanted to display this other Mirage book. Just me. Okay, yeah. So I'm displaying myself, and this one, Cynthia Barnett. This is a very Florida book and includes some history. It does talk about burning a little bit, but it's mostly about water. But of course, water and fire are very interrelated.
Yes, hugely interrelated. Oh yeah. You can't. Again, it's the presence and absence of both. If you have more fire, more water, you'll change the habitat. Less fire, less water. Yeah, it's all it's interesting. People don't like change much, but nature loves it.
I also wanted to recommend, I have it here. Good thing my microphone is pretty stretchy. The Swamp.
Oh, yeah.
Book.
Yep.
If you want historical, the Everglades, Florida, and the politics of paradise, really water heavy as well, but I mean, good about the history of sort of Florida ecological disasters.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one on my, thanks for reminding me. I gotta read that.
All right, so there's no more questions in the chat, so I guess we can let you have a lovely Thursday evening, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Val. Fun as always. And so you'll be out there Saturday?
I have not decided if I am attending, but
gotcha.
I may.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be trying to clean up my office on Friday. And Saturday, so a lot. See, everyone says that. Yeah.
Up in Altamont, right?
No, GWP.
Oh, well then maybe I will come and bother you while you're cleaning.
Now I'll be there tomorrow. If I get everything done tomorrow, then I won't be there Saturday. But I plan on being there both days. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm still gonna be working with all my TNC folks, but just now training and teaching and stuff, which is what I like doing now as I get older.
Yeah, I feel you.
Cool.
All right, well, I'll switch back to me and just tell everybody, I hope you go on the field trip and make sure you're a member of the Florida Native Plant Society.
Yes.
We all are, so just do it.
That's right. Yeah, there's no excuse not to.
And you get all the lunch and learns, $35 a year, and you get all my lunch and learns. And
that's a bargain.
It's a bargain. Yeah.
That should be like 3 times the money. That's a bargain.
It should be like $100 a year. Okay. Thank you, Zach. You've been
All right.
wonderful as usual.
Thank you, Val. Much
Okay.
appreciated. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. I'll see you later.
See you later.
Bye, everyone.